I feel like I need to speak about two different leaders, two very different leaders that I've had um, in my life that really strike me as demonstrating not only the personal leadership resources and not only the tensions that that Fullen mentioned, but just they were memorable people. They were really interesting people to work with. One is someone that I worked with before I became a teacher, and another individual is a principal that that I worked with for a few years. So before I became a teacher, I was a chef, and I came into working foods very pragmatically. I started doing hospitality just because I wanted to make my own money. In my family, it was always straight up conversations around how much money was available for any given thing. My dad taught me how to do taxes with me, and um, I was always aware of the financial reality, the economic reality of our household. And when it wasn't possible for me to get a brand new bike, I decided to go out and get a job. So the easiest job I could get was a job in a restaurant. So I started working in restaurants pretty much in grade nine and kept on working through restaurants all the way through high school, through post secondary while I was at university. And then I returned to it with a deep focus after I did some traveling around Canada, and I started to do a chef's apprenticeship. And then ultimately, I was a working chef for quite a few years. So the individual that comes to mind is the owner of one of the large restaurants that I ran. As it was either you could call me chef de cuisine, managing chef, or executive chef. It was kind of all the same, leader of the kitchen position. And what I one of the first questions that people ask me when they find out that I've worked in hospitality, they always ask, "Oh, were you like that Gordon Ramsay guy?" And I will say, I guess they're looking for that energy. They're looking for the Food Network over the topness of it. And I will say this. I know I'm not supposed to name names, but okay, I'll call him Mike. So Mike, not his name, but Mike, as a leader, never demonstrated any of that sort of energy that you would think would be about the sort of the marketing of that high tension, high stress, always action oriented, lots of chaos, managing multiple deliveries and outcomes, satisfying diverse communities, communicating clearly so that individuals that are working with and for and beside are all clear on what they have to do. Like when I observed Mike in action, in a lot of ways he became a deep mentor without he was an accidental mentor for me, because I don't think at the time I really had a clear idea of how I was going to learn about the business once I left my apprenticeship. So I did do a chef's apprenticeship. That was a very close relationship I had with one chef where I learned all of his tools, got my hours, wrote an exam, and then I sort of moved on. um, he Another really great example, one of the tensions that Fullen mentions about that sort of like becoming indispensable, because he was the center of my universe, and then I got to a level where he had taught me so much that I needed to move on and learn somewhere else. But I'm going to go back to Mike for a second. So Mike, this restaurant was in downtown Toronto, very busy in the theater district, so we were always hopping in there. And when I observed Mike as a leader, I mean, at first he started off as my boss because he was the one that was paying, for my paycheck. And I wasn't really clear on, apart from the fact for the job that I was hired for, and I understood it from a textbook and a school. I went to Humber College to learn how to not only kitchen manage, but also to cook and run restaurants. But you never really know what that looks like until you're put into a position to use those skills, much like, I guess, the process of becoming an administrator. The the textbook stuff that you learn about Education Act and about dealing with your SRO and the diverse communities, you arrive on that first day and it's like, let's get to work. What does that look like? And then from there you start asking the questions about kind of everything that I've learned. What do I need now? So I always, you feel like you're grabbing something off the back of your shelf, like, oh, there's that note that I did, oh, there's that person I need to talk to. It was very much like that when I started to run the restaurant. I was going from a textbook, but I didn't really have a clue about the system that I was working within. And that's what Mike really gave me a clear understanding of. Mike had opened and run restaurants, successful restaurants in Florida and Montreal and now in Toronto. And one of the things that confused me at first, because I didn't really know what to do with it, but ultimately really opened my eyes up was that Mike was constantly bringing in people from these different spaces that he had worked with and bringing them in to work with us. He was bringing in the resources, the people resources, that social currency, bringing them in and working with us to sort of show us different ways to do, different better ways to do the work that we were doing in the restaurant. Now, the restaurant itself was a rib restaurant. We did have recipe books. We had standard practices. We had all these things that we had to deliver specific product. And there was a couple of these restaurants around. So people were coming into the restaurant having expectations based on what they experienced at another restaurant of the same name, just a different franchise. So what was really fascinating what Mike did is by bringing these people in, kind of reminded us that there's other things going on outside of our restaurant, no matter how kind of pigeonholed we got or the blinders up that everything that we had to do was right in front of us for our success. He kept on bringing in people to sort of remind us about preparing vegetables in a different way, or bringing in different meat purveyors, or suggesting that there could be a difference if we're going to use a flour from Italy versus if we're going to use a flour from North America. And this type of kind of leveraging and tension and sort of like tweaking within there. I was coming out thinking they're going to be standard recipes. We're going to go for it, almost very factory thinking for food. And he was bringing in, no, you need to let the outside in. You need to sort of have other people, let them have access to your leadership, your learning, so that you can become better. And I don't think I really felt the value of that entirely at the time, but I see the value now. At the time, it stressed me out because I was the one that was on the hook for doing the staffing, doing the budgets, doing the profits, doing the loss, all these things that kind of came down to money. And I never really sat in a settled position for it. But I will say that in reflection after the fact, what he really was like, he was cracking off on number 4, that idea of change agents, the individuals that you're working with. They're the ones that bring change and bring influence and bring a difference to the projects that you're working on. Because the other thing that he would also do is he would ask us our opinion. Did that flower actually work out how we had planned? Or did that speaker connect to you? Were they effective? Do we need to bring somebody else in? The other thing that Mike did quite frequently is that he would bring groups of individuals that worked at the restaurant and myself, and we would go and we would eat at other restaurants, and we would go to food conventions, and we would go and get cooking lessons. And it's really funny. I've never ever heard of any other restaurant. It's a long time since I've been in the restaurant, but I've never ever heard of another restaurant where the staff was actually taken out to dinner to other restaurants with the intent of learning from them, not stealing the recipes, not saying, can we replicate what they're doing here? It's, can we do better because they're doing a better version of it? And we had really great relationships with a lot of the restaurants in Toronto where we'd make reservations and we'd get to go in, sit across the table from the staff, like, I don't know, something like the chef's table, except talking to the staff as peers. So that ability to sort of share and cross-pollinate. And it was weird because that tension in itself was a little bit like that lead and learn at the same time. At one point, we're asking questions, and at another point, we're answering questions, and all the time bringing in new ideas for it. So in 2005, I transitioned out of hospitality and running restaurants and started working for the York Region District School Board. So yeah, that's my first. Mike, really a wonderful leader. And the lessons that I learned there when I first jumped into teaching with the York Region District School Board, I don't think I didn't have a way to kind of synthesize and transfer that over. It almost felt like that life was then, this life is now. But the longer I've stayed in education and I start to take courses even like this, the PQP1, the more I'm starting to see the connections between good leadership in one sphere and how those elements translate over into another sphere. So a second leader that I wanted to land on lightly is a principal that I worked with. And I'm going to start with the provocation that still sticks with me to this day from this individual. And without giving, the lengthy context as to how this came about, but the question, okay, no, I'm going to have to say it. Sorry, Tina, you're going to listen to this. You're going to see it. So I was involved in a committee that had been putting together a project. It was sort of like a graduation project that had happened on a several year basis. So I'd been involved with it for 3 years. In the third year, I decided kind of out of hand that I wanted to transition. I wanted to hand this over to somebody else. I wanted somebody to kind of take it over, and I wanted to work on something else. And I did have other things that I wanted to work on. So I in short order, probably within about a month's time, as I was wrapping it up, I started to talk more and more to the team that was involved and let them know about how I did my part of it. It had to do with getting some pictures made and framed, and it was an award process for graduates. The Character Matters awards that are character matters or character traits that are within my board, and what we had were awards that aligned with that, and they were given to students. So I wanted to transition out of that position. I wanted to try something else, and I guess I could have done both at the same time, but I was also getting a little bit I guess tired of the project. I wanted something new. I wanted a different challenge. So I went to the team and I said, look, this is going to be my last year of doing this, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my resources so everybody knows how to sort of do this thing. And everyone was like, okay, it's unfortunate, we're sad to see you go. We're really appreciative. Thank you very much. And away we went. It was sort of a subcommittee to the graduation committee. The principal at the time called me for a meeting. We sat down and we were talking just in general about committee leadership and sort of what I was looking for and what excited me and what was fascinating to me about committee leadership. And he also asked, he said, so I heard that you're leaving this particular position. And he asked me point blank, he said, so do you know for sure that your team is ready for you to leave? And I was sort of like, I was a little stunned. I didn't really know. At first, I wanted to answer quickly and like somehow I had just taken care of, tick boxes. And yeah, they know who to call. They know how to. But as we talked more, he sort of brought to light about the relationship part of it and how much time I had given to support my own transition out and somebody else to effectively take on the actual responsibility. And this has stayed with me. It has stayed with me because part of my drive in teaching is taking on new projects. Like I say yes, I love to. I also like that, I'll go back to Fullen's thing about being essential, indispensable, that him asking me that question, I thought that I was dispensable, that someone else could just kind of take it on and do it. What I didn't really realize though is that I hadn't really tipped the scale from essential to dispensable because I hadn't taken the steps to actually nurture and train someone into that space. So, dude was deep in his psych resources here because he was asking questions, kind of getting in my head, and really, in a positive way, lighting me up to think about the value of the relationship, even though I was leaving it to a certain degree. So even though I was leaving this crew, that there was deep value to that. And I think at the time I didn't give it a lot of weight. I thought that someone else would just step in and take on. I didn't really consider the heart that was involved in this actual committee. I take this with me personally, and it stuck with me because I am the type of person I've taught at now 4 different schools, and I've voluntarily gone to these schools. I've sought out new positions and new spaces, and I think in doing this, I'm really kind of, I don't know, I'm looking to sort of see the system. I'm looking to connect with new people, gather new resources, see new problems, and in doing so, really get to love new problems in new spaces. And I've become more aware of this, that as I start to think about my transition out of a position, this principle in particular, it echoes back and the question comes up, is your team ready for you to leave? And I think often when we think about leadership positions, that there could be more times than not where you're asked to leave, as in your transfer to another school, at least from an administrator's point of view. Or let's say, even as a teacher, I mean, another teacher leader, you can be surplused and you no longer can sort of teach, maybe even in the school that you want to. So I think when we start to talk about voluntarily leaving and moving on, it isn't quite as, there's not much of a conversation there as opposed to more times where it's kind of taken away from you and you have to move on. So this principle, it stuck with me, and ever since then, I give as much of my heart to developing the actual project that I'm working on as I do to what does me leaving this position look like. And it really has changed specifically how I do committee work, because it really does come down to, even in recently in some of the involvement in equity committee right now. Our equity committee at the school that I'm leaving is still involved in an inquiry, and we're doing book talks over the summer. So I'm still there. I'm still a part of it over the summer, so that we can kind of come to a good close. And that as I leave, I'm not only leaving with good connections to the people that I'm leaving, I'm also taking care of my responsibilities, but I'm also um, building something for the future. As in, I'll be taking some better resources, richer resources, and definitely the relationships to come along for the ride too. So this is my reflection for module one. Thank you for module one. This has been fantastic. Thank you.